Welcome back, explorers. What if I told you there's a secret desert kingdom hidden deep in the mountains of Nepal that most people don't even know exists? Tonight, we're unveiling the incredible Himalayan kingdom of Mustang, a forbidden land where ancient Tibetan culture thrives in complete isolation, surrounded by towering peaks and mystical caves. You're about to discover one of Earth's last hidden civilizations. Smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible journeys as we drift into this extraordinary world together. Chapter 1: The Forbidden Kingdom Beyond the Peaks. In the hour before dawn, when the world holds its breath between night and day, there exists a place that time forgot. Hidden beyond the towering peaks of the Himalayas, where the earth rises so high that clouds drift below like forgotten dreams, lies the desert kingdom of Mustang. Here, in this secret realm of the Trans-Himalayas, the fierce mountain winds have carved a landscape from another world entirely. Red sandstone cliffs rise like ancient fortresses against a sky so blue it seems painted by the gods themselves. This is no ordinary desert, this is a high-altitude wilderness where snow-capped peaks guard valleys of rust-colored earth, where Buddhist prayer flags flutter like colorful birds against a backdrop of infinite sky. The morning light arrives slowly in Mustang, creeping across the barren hills like honey poured from a great height. As the sun crests the eastern ridges, it illuminates a walled city that has stood unchanged for 6 centuries, its whitewashed walls and flat-roofed buildings emerging from the desert floor like a mirage made real. The intense high-altitude sunlight catches the golden rooftops of ancient monasteries, sending shafts of brilliance across the courtyard where crimson-robed monks begin their morning prayers. Listen. In the thin air of this high desert, sound carries differently. The rhythmic chanting drifts from the Gampa, low and hypnotic, mingling with the constant whisper of wind through the valley. Prayer wheels spin slowly in the morning breeze, their gentle creaking a meditation in itself. Somewhere beyond the walls, yak bells jingle as a caravan prepares for another journey along the ancient trade routes that have sustained this kingdom for generations. This is Mustang, the last forbidden kingdom, a place where the Kali Gandaki River has carved the deepest valley on earth, where Tibetan Buddhism flourishes in caves carved into cliffsides, where the air is so clear you can see forever and yet feel utterly enclosed by the immensity of stone and sky. To understand this place, you must first understand isolation. For over 600 years, the kingdom of Mustang has existed in splendid solitude, protected not by armies but by geography itself. The Himalayas create a rain shadow here, blocking the monsoons and leaving a landscape more reminiscent of Tibet than the lush green hills of lower Nepal. It is a desert at the top of the world, where winter winds howl like banshees and summer sun blazes with crystalline intensity. The people who chose to make this harsh land their home developed something extraordinary, a culture that embraced both the severity and the transcendent beauty of their environment. In Mustang, the capital city founded in 1380, life revolves around rhythms unchanged by centuries. The Gyalpo, the king of this small realm, still holds court in a palace whose thick walls have weathered countless storms. Buddhist lamas tend libraries of ancient texts written on palm leaves, their wisdom preserved in the dry desert air like sacred mummies. Walk through the narrow streets of the walled city in these early morning hours, and you enter a world where time moves differently. Adobe homes huddle together for protection against the wind, their small windows glowing with the warm light of burning yak butter lamps. In hidden courtyards, women grind barley in stone mills that sing with each revolution, preparing the roasted barley flour that has sustained their people through countless winters. Above the city, Chorten's Buddhist stupas stand sentinel against the sky, their white forms stark against the red earth. Prayer flags stretch between them, carrying mantras on every gust of wind that tears across this high plateau. These flags fade quickly in the intense sunlight and fierce weather, but they are replaced again and again, a cycle of renewal that mirrors the Buddhist understanding of impermanence. This is a place where the ordinary world falls away. Here, in the silence between wind gusts, in the pause between one prayer and the next, you begin to understand what drew people to this impossible kingdom. It is not spite for the harsh conditions, but love for a landscape so stark it strips everything away except what is essential, love for a way of life that finds the sacred in survival itself. As the morning light strengthens and the first smoke rises from cooking fires, the hidden kingdom of Mustang awakens to another day in its timeless dance with the desert sky. This is where our journey into the heart of the world's last Buddhist kingdom begins. As dawn breaks over Lo Man Tang, the ancient rhythms that once governed the greatest trade routes in the Himalayas still echo through these desert valleys. For 5 centuries, this hidden kingdom stood at the crossroads of empires, where fortunes were made and lost with each caravan that crossed the windswept passes between Tibet and the Indian plains below. Listen to the wind howling through the Kali Gandaki Valley, and you hear the ghosts of 1,000 yak bells. From the 1400s until the world changed forever in 1959, these narrow trails carried more than goods, they carried the lifeblood of civilizations. Salt from the Great Lakes of Tibet descended these paths, white gold that could preserve meat through the harshest winters. Grain from the fertile valleys of Nepal climbed toward the sky, barley and rice that sustained the monasteries and palaces of the high plateau. The Lo dynasty understood power in its purest form: control the passes, control the wealth of nations. Each caravan that wound through these red canyons paid tribute to the Gyelpo, the king whose palace still towers over Lo Man Thang's ancient walls. Yak trains stretching for miles would rest in the protected courtyards below, their loads of precious cargo secured behind thick adobe walls while traders negotiated in the shadows of prayer wheels that spun endlessly in the mountain wind. But this was far more than commerce. These trade routes carried ideas, art, and devotion across the roof of the world. Tibetan Buddhism flowed like water through these valleys, pooling in magnificent gampas where monks preserved manuscripts that contained the wisdom of ages. Thangka paintings traveled in carefully wrapped bundles, their sacred images destined for monastery walls hundreds of miles away. Lamas moved between kingdoms, carrying blessings and teachings that transcended borders drawn on no maps that mattered here. Picture the spring festivals when the caravans returned from their winter journeys to Tibet. The entire kingdom would awaken from months of isolation as wealth poured through the gates of Lo Man Tang. Prayer flags by the thousands would snap in celebration across terraces where barley grew in defiant green against the desert landscape. The sound of long horns would echo from the monastery courtyards, calling the faithful to give thanks for another season survived, another year of prosperity secured. The palace courtyard would fill with the exotic sounds of distant lands, the musical speech of Tibetan merchants, the patient snorting of yaks being unloaded, the rustle of silk and the clink of silver ornaments. Children who had known only the wind and silence of winter would press against doorways, wide-eyed at the sudden transformation of their world into a bustling crossroads of the Himalayas. In those golden decades before 1959, the relationship with Tibet was like breath itself, natural, essential, life-sustaining. Buddhist teachings flowed south while grain flowed north, creating a spiritual and economic ecosystem that had endured for half a millennium. The high passes were highways of faith and commerce, connecting the isolated kingdom of Lo Man Tang to the vast Tibetan plateau beyond the peaks. The Gyelpo's power rested not on armies but on geography and wisdom. To tax fairly but not excessively, to protect caravans from bandits, to maintain the delicate relationships that kept goods flowing across some of the most treacherous terrain on earth, this required a diplomatic skill that matched the physical endurance demanded by life at 15,000 feet. The elaborate polyandry customs that governed noble families ensured that trade relationships remained stable across generations. Brothers would share wives not just to consolidate land holdings, but to maintain the complex networks of trust that made commerce possible across vast distances. When a caravan departed Lo Man Tang for the Tibetan plateau, it carried not just goods but the accumulated social capital of centuries. The wealth generated by this trade built more than palaces. It funded the copying of sacred texts, the training of artists who created masterworks in impossible isolation, the maintenance of irrigation systems that turned desert into barely adequate farmland. Every yak bell that rang in these valleys supported a civilization that chose beauty and wisdom over mere survival. The monastery bells that call across Lo Mantang at sunset still echo the rhythms of that golden age, when this hidden kingdom stood at the center of the world. In the fading light, with prayer flags streaming toward Tibet, you can almost hear the caravans returning home across the high passes, laden with sultan stories from the roof of the world. Tomorrow's winds will tell us how this ancient prosperity would face its greatest test. The winds that once carried the sound of approaching caravans began to whisper different stories as the 20th century deepened. When the borders with Tibet sealed in 1959, more than trade routes closed, pathways that had pulsed with life for 6 centuries fell silent, leaving the kingdom of Mustang to face an isolation it had never known. The transformation came slowly, like the erosion that carved these canyons grain by grain. Yak herders who once planned their journeys around Tibetan markets found themselves staring at horizons they could no longer cross. The elaborate trade festivals that brought together merchants from across the Trans-Himalayan world simply ceased to exist, leaving empty spaces in the calendar that had structured life for generations. In the monasteries of Lo Mantang, the lamas adapted to new rhythms of devotion. Without the wealth flowing from tariffs and trade commissions, the Gampas turned inward, becoming refuges of pure spiritual practice rather than centers of commercial blessing. The great libraries that had grown fat with manuscripts acquired from Lhasa and other Tibetan centers now preserved what they possessed with fierce dedication, understanding that replacement might never come. Brother Tenzin, keeper of texts at Jampa Gampa, spent his mornings grinding pigments for Thanka restoration with the same patience his ancestors had shown for copying sutras. The colors came from local minerals now, the exotic ultramarine and cinnabar from distant markets were memories held in paintings too precious to touch. Yet in the simplified palette imposed by isolation, something essential emerged more clearly, like stars becoming visible as the last fire dims. The polyandry customs that had once served trade diplomacy found new purpose in pure survival. Families consolidated not to manage business relationships but to husband every resource in an economy learning to live within itself. Noble households that had entertained Tibetan merchants in elaborate ceremonies now gathered for humbler rituals, the first barley harvest, the blessing of yak butter churns, the simple miracle of another generation born into this impossible landscape. The seasonal rhythms that had once synchronized with caravan schedules began to follow older patterns written in wind and star. Summer brought the urgent work of coaxing crops from terraced fields that seemed to hang between earth and sky. The irrigation channels carved from cliffsides required constant maintenance, each stone placed with the knowledge that failure meant starvation before spring returned. Autumn became the season of gathering, not just harvest but the collection of everything that might sustain life through the brutal months ahead. Yak dung for fuel, medicinal herbs from secret valleys, the careful preservation of every grain of barley in storage chambers that had served the same purpose since Impal first established his kingdom. Winter's arrival brought a silence deeper than the ancient trade lulls. Snow sealed the high passes completely, but now there were no caravans waiting beyond the ranges. The long dark months became times of pure endurance, families gathering around fires fed by carefully hoarded fuel, storytellers weaving the old tales with new understanding of what it meant to be truly alone at the top of the world. Spring carried different promises now. Instead of preparation for the trading season, it brought the simple relief of survival, the gradual awakening of life that asked nothing of the wider world. Prayer flags raised toward Tibet still fluttered with ancient hopes, but they blessed journeys that existed mainly in memory and dream. The children born into this new isolation grew up with stories of the great caravans but learned skills that served a smaller world. They mastered the art of making everything last, of finding purpose in preservation rather than accumulation. Their games echoed old rituals of commercial hospitality, but played out in courtyards where no strangers would come. Yet something remarkable emerged from this enforced solitude. Stripped of external validation and wealth, the culture of Mustang discovered its own essential nature. The Buddhism practiced in these high monasteries achieved a purity that prosperity had sometimes obscured. The art created in caves carved from living rock reached toward truths that needed no market to confirm their value. The wind-carved canyons that had channeled centuries of human ambition became teachers of different wisdom. They spoke of endurance measured not in profit but in the simple persistence of beauty, the quiet victory of maintaining consciousness and compassion in a place that challenged the very possibility of human life. In the gathering dusk, when monastery bells ring across valleys where no answering bells respond, the kingdom of Mustang discovered something that no caravan had ever brought from distant lands, the knowledge that some treasures grow more precious when the world forgets they exist. In the deepest hours of mountain night, when even the eternal winds pause their ancient conversations, the kingdom of Mustang settles into rhythms older than memory itself. Here, where the spine of the world meets the endless sky, time moves like prayer will shadows, circular, sacred, unmeasured by the urgencies that drive the distant world below. The mud brick walls of Lo Mantang absorb the day's fierce heat and release it slowly into darkness, breathing with the patient respiration of centuries. Each grain of clay in these ramparts was mixed with barley chaff and blessed water, built by hands that understood shelter not as mere protection from elements, but as partnership with forces too vast for conquest. The walls themselves have become part of the mountain's dreaming, weathered smooth by winds that carry snow from peaks unnamed in any earthly tongue. Within the palace chambers where Gyalpos once received tribute from Tibetan salt traders, shadows pool in corners where Thangka paintings glow faintly in butter lamplight. The painted eyes of Buddhist deities watch over silence so complete it seems to hold its own consciousness. These walls have witnessed the rise and dissolution of fortunes, the birth and passing of dynasties, the slow dance of seasons that marks all time in this place where clocks would be meaningless artifacts. The monastery courtyards lie empty now under starfields so dense they seem close enough to harvest. Prayer wheels stand motionless, their copper surfaces reflecting moonlight that has traveled from horizons no living Mustangi will cross. Yet in this stillness lives a presence more vivid than movement, the accumulated devotion of countless hands that have turned these wheels, countless voices that have whispered mantras into the thin air until the very stones learn to chant. In the cave complexes carved into canyon walls, meditation chambers preserve darkness that has known unbroken contemplation for 600 years. Here, in spaces hollowed from living rock by monks seeking truth in absolute solitude, the boundary between human consciousness and mountain consciousness dissolves into something wordless and complete. The caves breathe with draft currents that follow patterns established before any human foot touched these heights, connecting interior spaces in networks that mirror the pathways of enlightened mind. The terraced fields lie dormant under frost, but their careful geometry speaks of dialogue between human intention and the mountain's grudging generosity. Each terrace was carved from slopes that wanted only to be vertical, coaxed into accepting barley seeds that had no business surviving at altitudes where the air itself is transparent. The irrigation channels that feed these impossibilities follow grades calculated by ancestors who understood that in this place, the difference between one degree of slope and another could mean the difference between abundance and starvation. Above the highest human habitation, where even the hardiest barley cannot grow, the peaks rise into atmosphere too thin for prayer flags. Here the mountains shed their names and become pure presence, witnesses to the small, precious experiment in consciousness that has flickered in the valleys below for such a brief span of geological time. The snow that crowns these summits has never melted, accumulating layer by layer into archives of weather patterns older than human language. In the deepest chambers of the monastery, wrapped in silk that has traveled impossible distances, rest manuscripts written in scripts that only a handful of living humans can read. The texts preserve not just words but breathing patterns, meditation techniques, ways of arranging awareness that were discovered in this thin air and recorded for transmission to minds not yet born. The yak hide pages hold knowledge that makes no distinction between the cultivation of barley and the cultivation of wisdom, between the maintenance of irrigation channels and the maintenance of consciousness. The wind returns before dawn, as it always does, carrying scents of snow and distance across valleys where echo has learned to substitute for conversation. It moves through abandoned trading posts like a patient scholar, turning pages of account books whose numbers record transactions in currencies that no longer exist. Yet the wind finds in these empty ledgers something that transcends commerce, evidence of human beings who learn to live gracefully within limitations that would defeat lesser dreams. When the first light touches the prayer flags and sets them moving again, the kingdom of Mustang awakens not to the demands of a new day, but to the continuation of a day that began centuries ago and may continue for centuries hence. Here, in this place where time stands still, the mountains keep their watch, and the silence holds everything sacred that words could never contain.